Ichimon Japan is supported by listeners like you. If you enjoy the show and want to make sure that we can keep bringing you more content like this, then go check out our Patreon page at japankyo.com/Patreon. Yeah, it's just a practicality kind of thing too, because if you have like thousands of people saying hi to each other, it's just like nothing gets done, right?
Yeah, can you imagine the crossing at Shibuya?
Yeah.
Everyone's talking like, konnichiwa, 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 konnichiwa.
Welcome to the show. So, I am Tony and
I am Ryan.
Yeah, so
Again.
it's as always, Tony and Ryan here to ask questions about Japan, because this is Ichimon Japan. Ichimon means one question. So what we do...
It does?
Yeah.
Oh, why didn't you tell me that before?
I guess you never pay attention at the beginning of the episode.
Or in Japanese class for the last 14 years.
Yeah. You always just zone out right when Ichimon, they use that question. You just zoned out. You go, Ryan, yes.
And I'm Ryan. Welcome to Ichimon Japan.
So Ichimon means one question. We ask a question about Japan. And today's question is, what's better, rural life or city life in Japan?
And the answer is city life. See you next time.
You always answer my questions, right?
This one's easy, though.
Well, kind of. But I think, ultimately, it does depend on, this is a subjective thing.
Yeah, if you're right or wrong.
Oh, man. We're going to get some hate mail. They say it's always better to get a reaction than no reaction at all, right?
I guess so.
So yes, it's a subjective thing, and it depends on everybody's own unique experiences, etc. This is just our experiences and what we particularly enjoy. We both have experience living in Japan. At this point, Ryan, I believe, does have a couple years more living in Japan than I did. I ultimately 4 years, although I keep visiting every year.
I think I'm finishing up my 7th year soon.
Yeah, there you go. So, and also, we both have experiences living in Kansai. So I was in Kobe and Osaka, and Ryan, you were in Osaka when you were in Kansai, right?
Yeah, 2 years Osaka City, 2 years Sakai City,
Yeah.
but all Osaka Prefecture.
Right. And then I don't have experience living in, I guess, quote unquote, rural, what we're going to call rural, though we will get into what exactly rural is later. But I don't have experience living there per se, but I do have extended stays in, for example, 3 weeks in Kagoshima and about in total a month in pretty rural Fukuoka. So, and Ryan, what about you?
I'm currently living in what in Japan is considered rural, and it's my 3rd year here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
In Ishikawa Prefecture.
Right. Yeah, we should.
I should say the place.
Yes. Ishikawa. Where can you describe? Kind of give people an idea where that is.
So if you look at Japan, in the center of it, on the northern end, there's a little peninsula. Mm-hmm. That peninsula is Ishikawa.
Right.
I'm not actually on the peninsula, but I'm right next to it.
And are there any places that are fairly well known that people might recognize near in that general area?
The most famous city here would be Kanazawa, which most Japanese people have heard of, but I think foreigners usually don't know it.
Yeah. If that is a pretty well known, but yeah, not so much, I guess, outside.
If you're really into archaeology, I'm next to Fukui Prefecture, which has Japan's most famous dinosaur museum, and apparently they found dinosaur breeds native to there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically all we got for famous things.
All right. So you are, I guess, a little bit more on the Kansai side of things rather than Kanto, or is it kind of in the middle?
It is. So geographically, we're slightly Western, depending on what you're talking about. Sometimes we get lumped in with East, sometimes we get lumped in with West. Mm-hmm. I believe on JR, we're part of the Nishi Nihon tracks, though, which is the Western one.
Right. So Kanto is east side, general Tokyo and surrounding areas. Kansai is west side, Osaka, Kyoto, Kobe, that whole area.
A way I like to divide the country is on the east Tokyo side on escalators. People always stand on the left,
Yeah.
and on the west they stand on the right.
Uh-huh.
And where I live, people just stand on both sides.
And if you want to learn more about that, go back to our train episode. Yeah, we talk all about that in that episode. But
I think the dialect here is a little bit more Kansai inspired than Kanto inspired, though.
mm-hmm.
Like people will say so ya instead of so da.
Okay, that's interesting. So that I guess we should explain a little bit what we mean by rural. Of course, there are extreme rural situations where like you're like in an island in the middle of nowhere, or like just some extremely like I don't know, there's 10 people in your village or something, right? But neither of us have experienced living in a place like that. Maybe I've
visited a couple, but
yeah.
So if it's okay, the most rural experience I've had is a friend of mine was from a city called Yokose.
I've never heard of that place.
No one in Japan's heard of it. It's like, it's hard to get to because it's so small, but it's like probably 2 hours north of Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in Ibaragi.
Yeah.
And the population, I believe, is somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000.
Yeah.
And I feel like you could stand on a hill and see the entire town. They have like a 7-Eleven and that's about it, and then houses.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I've heard stories, for example, like one guy told me back when I was in Kobe, somebody told me a story about like they knew somebody that was living on an island where they had to drive like, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes to go to the nearest konbini or supermarket that sold cheese, for example. Like they just didn't have cheese anywhere else. That was like the only place that had it. So another case, this guy, maybe he's listening to the podcast. I don't know him. His name is Jules. So Jules, if you're listening, hey. But I met him in Kobe.
Jules.
Hey, Jules. Nice guy. He's a really nice guy. I got to hang out with him a few times in Kobe. But he told me this story. He had lived in Kobe for a long time. He told me this story back in the day. Somebody came to a hotel for there was a big meeting of JET, English teachers in Kobe. And so they came from all around the area. And he lived in like a super rural place where they only had like he only got to use like Japanese style squat toilets, right? Like I don't know how long ago this was, maybe like 15 years ago. So maybe that's not the case anymore, but when he got to the hotel and he was able to use like a Western style toilet, and this guy was apparently kind of big, right? He was so happy that he started crying.
I mean, I can understand that.
Yeah. So this is secondhand information from Jules, but I remember this story very vividly because it's just such an interesting story. Like, wow, like that's how rural he was. Like, yeah. So
the most extreme story I've ever heard was a friend who was on JET program that was put on a tiny island. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the name. I think it was near Honshu though.
Yeah.
But they had a grand total of 2 ferries a day that went to the mainland.
Right.
Like one at like 7:30 in the morning and then one at 7:30 at night or something.
Right, yeah.
And if you want to do any shopping or do any, like move anything that you would expect to be in a normal city, he had to take the ferry and then be gone the whole day.
Yeah.
But his apartment was on the tiny island, and I think it was only like 800 people in like one school. They just had them all together.
Right, yeah. So, of course, well, I guess rural...
I don't know about this toilet situation.
Yes.
They just didn't have toilets on this island.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm sure with a few hundred, I guess they probably did.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's at least toilets.
Yeah. Well, when you get into like, 20 people village or something, then maybe they still have like the hole in the ground kind of place. But
I did also meet a girl who lived in Shikoku, and she said her local village train station only had kisha, not densha.
So kisha is like steam locomotive kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and like when she told people that, even Japanese people didn't know they were still in use anywhere in Japan.
Yeah, like I would figure they're only like a tourist kind of thing, but I guess not. Wow. Yeah, so rural, of course, typically they would just rural or countryside, inaka, right? Like that's you hear that word thrown around a lot, even with foreigners, like, oh, I live in the inaka or whatever. And then
I think they think it's easier to pronounce than rural, so they quickly adopt it.
I think it is. It really is. Rural is such a Inaka's
Yeah.
easier, I think.
Your country's kind of vague because you could mean like actual country.
Yeah.
Inaka just solves all the problems.
And you alluded to it earlier, and even when we were talking to it before, but given how huge a city like Tokyo is, or even Osaka, or other cities, there is a very low bar for what you call rural or inaka, I guess you'd say, right? So what we would just say like is suburban in the US, for example, and it's not particularly rural, quote unquote. In Japan, like a city person would immediately say, "Oh, that's so inaka, that's do inaka," or whatever,
Yeah. It doesn't seem like people use a phrase for suburban often. It's just city or inaka.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you don't hear so much. You might hear, there's an interesting word that they use to kind of touch on something close to suburban, and it's beddo town. Have you ever heard that word?
Okay. I have heard that.
Yeah, so that's like made in Japan English, waseigo. That's bed town, right? That's for the people. That's kind of the place where people like live. They have their houses. They sleep there. That's why it's called a bed town. And then they go to work in the big city, right? So it's like the smaller cities that are surrounding the bigger city.
I think I heard someone describe Izumi City in Kansai as bed town for Osaka City.
Yeah. Or like where I lived in Osaka is Hirakata City. So I'm pretty sure you could call that a bed town. It's kind of like, you have everything you would ever need. Although it's not like a big city, but it's 20 minutes away from Osaka, 30 minutes away from Osaka by train, and kind of the same amount of time for the main part of Kyoto as well.
Okay.
So you could easily commute to either one.
So since we're on this topic, I'll throw out the town I am in Japan is considered inaka, but I think by most Western standards would just be suburban, maybe even large suburban. We have a population of about 120,000 people, which is not small.
Yeah, that's not small at all, but yeah.
But compared to like Tokyo, Osaka with like 10 million, seems small, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So
we do have we do have a lot of like farmland too, though. I think that helps with the inaka image.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you get around? Like, how's the transportation in that area?
My first year here, I was exclusively using a bicycle, but we have pretty cold winters with lots of snow. So after my first winter, I got a car. So now if the weather is good, bike. If not, I drive.
So then you do have a car, and you do. But how often do you use it? Just when the weather's bad?
Depends on what I'm doing. If it's just like go to work and come home day, then the weather is bad frequently here. This is actually like the rainiest prefecture in all of Japan. And I think Kanazawa is like the rainiest. I saw some list that was like cities with more than 200,000 people, just to like not count rainforests. And Kanazawa was like in the top 5 rainiest places in the world, I think. So it rains a lot. So 50% of the time I'm driving anyway just to not get drenched in the rain.
Yeah.
But if the weather's warm in the summer or spring and it's not raining, I bike.
Right. Okay.
Car is almost daily. I also use it if I have to like go grocery shopping or something, just because it's easier to carry groceries that way.
Now, when you go to the bigger cities or when you go to Tokyo, do you usually use a train then?
Yeah, always. It takes way too long to drive there. I think it's like a 9-hour drive to Tokyo from here.
Oh my goodness. And then how quickly? Well, I guess bullet train, then how?
Yeah, the Shinkansen bullet train is about 3 hours, I think.
Okay.
It ends up being a little longer because it doesn't leave from my local station. I have to go north 45 minutes to get on it, but not too bad.
Okay. So, how long did you say? Like 3.5 years now in Ichikawa?
Probably like a little over 3.5. I think I'm at like 3 and 9 months-ish or so.
Okay. And then 2 years.
So I'm pretty
in Osaka?
used to it. Osaka City 2 years. Okay. Osaka or Sakai City 2 years. But Sakai City's kind of indistinguishable from Osaka. They border each other and they're both really big urban areas.
Yeah. They just kind of blend into each other. Okay. So then let's address the question. What do you like about your time in the more rural side of Japan? What do you like about your time in the city?
I'm trying to think. So I will say I actually do like both. It's not so much that I like one and hate the other. It's more like I like one and I like the other more.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So what?
Trying to think of a good positive. I guess. Okay, I do enjoy actually biking. I kind of got into it when I lived in Hawaii, and it's much easier here, just because streets are a little bit more wide open and a little bit more like bicycle friendly. There's much less traffic, so it's easier to get around on it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true of all Inaka places or here, but the people are exceptionally friendly, especially to foreigners, which I think in the West usually the more rural the idea is, the less friendly they are to foreigners.
Yeah,
but we
that
actually
is
have like
the stereotype. Yeah, yeah, you do hear.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's true in case you live somewhere like that, but that stereotype exists.
Unfortunately, that is what you hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And here, there's actually like foreign culture festivals we have where people that live in the city from various countries open a booth and like will have food from their country or do like some kind of demonstration. Like I heard a Brazilian group did like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu demonstration last time.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, it's a very welcoming town. Very nice, friendly people. I like the school a lot. The place I work is probably the biggest advantage. The kids are just generally way more well-behaved.
Right.
In Osaka, it wasn't common, but we would occasionally have like actual fistfights break out in class.
Wow.
And I wasn't there for it, but I heard one of the students like threw his chair out the window once.
Oh my god. Yeah,
the same student who was in the fistfight.
Yeah, I've heard some awful stories of like, bad schools in Osaka and Kobe. Yeah.
Yeah. And here, our biggest problem is like they're 10 minutes late to class.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. So
how about you, if you want to say
Sure.
positives of the countryside?
Sure. I do agree. My experience in the more rural areas, people are just generally, ultimately, I won't say friendlier because it's not a question.
Yeah, I kind of want to avoid that too, because I think, at least in Kansai, they're also very friendly.
Yeah. When you ultimately get to talk to somebody in the city, generally, they are friendly. They're happy to talk to you. And
Yeah.
That's fine. You get the usual ratio of, not nice people and wonderful people. That's just doesn't matter where you go in the world.
Yeah.
Once you're able to start communication, then, usually it's no problem. But, I think the thing about rural life is that because it's such a tighter community, closer community, and people are, you just stand out more, obviously, and people just have more time to kind of talk and approach each other and build those relationships, then you do end up, it becomes easier to, I guess, approach people. People just talk to you and they might bring you like vegetables or something and just random little things, and they try to include you in the community events and bring you in the festivals, and it just, in that sense, I guess they're friendlier, or perhaps I should say more approachable.
Yeah, one thing I just was reminded of is when I lived in Osaka, my Osaka friends would tell me they were very surprised when they traveled abroad to America or Australia or whatever, and strangers would say hello and greet them.
Yeah.
Because they would tell me that never happens in Japan, and it totally happens in the Inaka.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
where I live now.
Yeah.
Just if I walk by any stranger, definitely, konnichiwa.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Even the kids.
Yeah. No, they all greet each other. It's very nice. And in the city, you're surrounded by millions and millions of people, but for the most part, they don't acknowledge each other. And it's just a practicality kind of thing too, because if you have like thousands of people saying hi to each other, it's just like nothing gets done, right?
Yeah, can you imagine the like crossing at Shibuya?
Yeah.
Everyone's talking like, konnichiwa.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. It's just not possible. But at the same time, like, unless you're really going out of your way to put yourself in like cultural situations, take certain classes with Japanese people, somehow just put yourself in situations where you have to interact with Japanese people and they have to interact with you. It can feel a little isolating because you're not going to get acknowledged on the street for the most part. You have to put in the effort to make those connections, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So in a way, I think that is a nice thing about living in the rural area, and that can also be wonderful for your Japanese because you just have more opportunities to have those time with people, right?
Yes, I think depending on how you view it, could be positive or negative, but there's less distractions in the rural areas.
Yeah.
So if your goal is to master Japanese and practice it, it's much easier to do here. There's usually less English speakers around that you can like kind of I don't know what word I want to say, distract yourself with. Like you're forced to interact with Japanese people more often.
Exactly, yeah.
And there's still good resources to learn Japanese. Like my town, we actually have a international exchange center where foreigners living here can go and get like really, really cheap Japanese lessons.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And speaking of that, life in the rural areas is cheaper, generally speaking, right?
That is true. My rent at my apartment is very, very low, and this is the biggest apartment I've ever had to like live in alone.
Could you give us an idea, like how it compares to your time in Osaka?
I think so I'm not that shy about money. If I want to just
all right, yeah, go ahead.
It's about 55,000 yen a month, which I think would be $530.
Yeah, roughly.
In
US dollars, yeah.
I had one that was a little bit more expensive in Osaka that was just a one bedroom and then one room that was like dining, kitchen, living room all combined.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably like $650 in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I have 2 bedrooms. I have a dining room and a kitchen that are separate. I have like a big storage closet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a room, you can't go in it, but it's like a very big closet. It's actually really helpful.
Yeah.
And I also have the separated bathroom and toilet that Japanese people love to have that usually foreigners don't care about.
Yeah.
And I have a parking space, which is also really, really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, and internet is included for free.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, in Tokyo, like you can easily get up to like the equivalent of $1,000 or something for probably something not as big as that if you're in, a pretty like central area. So
yeah,
it can definitely be like way cheaper, even like half the price. And of course, you even like stuff in the supermarket or vegetables, stuff. like that.
Yeah.
Generally,
my grocery bill's rarely over like 2,500 yen.
Mm-hmm. So that's like $25 or so. Yeah. So what did you like about the city?
Access to all the things.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first I'll mention is just like events, because the longer I've lived in Japan, the more I'm trying to like actively get involved. My first couple of years were just like, I'm gonna study Japanese and try to get to where I can talk with people. Yeah. I think I've achieved that now, so now it's like I want to actually go to concerts, go to shows, go to like all these things, and they just pretty much don't exist where I live.
Yeah.
Anytime there's some, like, I mean, we have like a movie theater, but anything I want to see that's more exciting than that, like band performances. Do you know the movie Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind?
Of course, yeah.
A very famous anime movie by Ghibli.
Yeah.
They're doing a 1 week only kabuki performance of it.
Oh, I've heard
exclusively in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And it's not even expensive. It's like 5,000 yen. I was like, that would be really fun. And then like, oh, it's only in this one place, and it takes 4 hours to get there, and I have to spend like $300 on transportation to go to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, though I do enjoy driving, I definitely prefer the convenience of trains. In the cities, you're never more than a 10-minute walk from wherever your closest station is. And the trains leave like every 3 to 4 minutes. And they're really nice because you don't really have to pay attention. So if you're like half asleep in the morning, you can just go nap on the train. You can play like Switch or DS or whatever while you're waiting. Yeah. You can read books. Yeah. Here, the closest train station to me is about a 20-minute walk. I'm kind of between two, and one's like 20 minutes, one's 30. And the trains come about once every 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Which was a bit of culture shock to me, because coming here after Osaka, I just like showed up at the station like, a train will come soon. I'm like, oh no, 35-minute wait. Great.
Yeah, that's how it was in Kagoshima. And that's how it is in Fukuoka too, where I stayed. It seems like it's around once an hour. So you have to look up, what time it's going to come before you leave the house.
Yeah, I remember when I first got to Kansai, they like gave me a train information sheet, like one of those little spreadsheets. And I quickly determined it wasn't worth having because the train came every 5 minutes anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Another big one, which would make everyone who lives here furious at me, but it's the truth. The food is way better in the cities.
I thought you were going to say that.
So people in the countryside strongly believe they have better food because they grow it here and it's fresher.
Yeah.
And that might be true if you're just like eating a carrot.
Yeah, just raw ingredients wise, perhaps, yes.
Yeah. But if you want to go to like a restaurant, we have like no variety here, and everything's kind of bland.
Yeah, yeah. What's their?
I'm a big. Our like Meibutsu?
Yeah. Their famous thing.
We don't have one. I've asked like my students, and the most common answer I get is Kanazawa curry, which I'm not actually in Kanazawa.
So what's your famous
like
thing?
stealing theirs.
Next door, we have famous curry.
And there's nothing unique to Kanazawa about it. Like, it's just normal curry. It's just in Kanazawa.
Yeah.
Like, in other areas, they'll actually have something different. Like, Hiroshima Okonomiyaki has, like, noodles in it.
Yeah.
This is just normal curry. It is good. I'm not going to, like, say bad things about it, but it's not as unique as you would expect.
Right.
And for my city, whenever I ask people, the only answer they can give me is carrots.
So you've been eating a lot of carrots.
I do eat a lot of carrots, to be honest, and like they're good. I like them, but
it's not.
Yeah,
you're not gonna go on a trip just to try the carrots, right?
Yeah, and like even if they're good, they're not like, oh, you need to visit my town to have carrots. Like if you're here, go ahead and try them, but they're not worth the trip. Restaurant variety is probably the biggest issue, though.
Yeah.
We have. So even though this town's not small, I think their mindset is that they're small. So we just have like a dearth of restaurants. I honestly think the best tasting restaurant in the entire town is our McDonald's. And I'm not afraid of Japanese food.
Yeah.
When I go to the cities like Tokyo and Osaka, I enjoy myself eating lots of like unique things to there.
Yeah.
It's just here. It's like the Japanese version of chain family restaurants, which are all like really bland, and they just kind of they're just cheap. That's why people go.
Yeah,
there.
no, cheap fast food, and it works, but
they're cheap.
It gets pretty boring if that's all you have.
We do have 2 Chinese restaurants, which are like our fancy restaurants we go to when we have special events.
Oh, the
and they're decent.
Yeah.
They're not amazing, but they're decent, and that's about it.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of ramen, and most of the people I know here are either Japanese people who are born and raised here or foreigners who've only worked here. So they think the ramen here is really good, but compared to Japan as a whole, it's kind of like D tier.
Yeah. Well, Ishikawa ramen, like you don't really hear about famous ramen from that general area of Japan at all. Right?
Yeah, like if you're desperate for ramen, it'll get you by, but there's nothing that's particularly like, wow. Like I've had ramen that you eat it and it's like, wow, this is an amazing meal.
Yeah.
How have I lived my life without this?
Yeah.
That has never happened here. And if you want anything else, anything international, we just don't have it.
Yeah, you know, like
I believe we have, we have things they think are Western restaurants, but they're just modern Japanese food, which they call Western,
quote unquote, which is Japan's original versions of kind of Western inspired stuff.
Yeah, we have like no Mexican. We do have an Indian place that's decent.
Okay, yeah, Indian you do get even in kind of rural areas. Like even in that place in Fukuoka that I was at, there was a really good like Indian place that we went to. So I don't know. I guess there's just enough people from India that come and they just have been able to spread around even to rural areas.
We have a grand total of 2 pizza places. Only one of them delivers.
Oh.
And in Japan, like in much of the world, like the big chains are still like Domino's and Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
We have neither of those. We just have like little local ones.
Oh, okay.
They're fine, but most of the people I know when they want pizza, they drive like 40 minutes to go to our Costco and have their pizza.
Oh.
And before you think like, oh, you have a Costco. No, we don't have a Costco. 3 cities north of here has a Costco.
But even Costco's are typically in the more like borderline like rural areas, right? Like
yeah, I think the land's cheaper for them to make their superstores in those areas.
Yeah. Like in Osaka.
So that is a plus, is I have access to a Costco.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, I do agree with pretty much all of that from my experiences. I mean, in Kagoshima, where I was there 3 weeks in the area that I was at, there seemed to be pretty much nothing in terms of like restaurants or anything. It was like purely just houses on the side of a mountain. Like you had to like walk down.
Yeah.
Like I remember it being at least 20 to 30 minutes. It may have even been more like down the slope, like I guess it was just the slope of the mountain all the way down to where the nearest train station was. And as far as I can remember, that was pretty much all like houses. There may have been like one or two like maybe roadside convenience stores or like a roadside ramen kind of place, but for the most part, no. So you had to go. And then even once you're in Kagoshima, choices are much more limited because Kagoshima is not, one of the bigger cities. But compare that to Osaka, you can get pretty much anything.
Yeah,
Tokyo especially, of course, you can just get off at any train station and you're going to find just tons of interesting restaurants.
Even unique things like the udon place we went.
Oh yeah, we had udon meshi, which is it doesn't sound as good as it is.
Yes, it is actually very good. Let's say that before we explain.
Yeah, udon is udon noodles, right? And then meshi is rice, so it's udon with rice in it. But they do some really really interesting recipes. And it was just great stuff. I loved it, and the price was totally reasonable, like just a typical teishoku, kind of like $10 roughly per meal. I think
that restaurant was good, but also that type of thinking, I think, is one of the benefits of the cities. Is people are more experimentative.
Yeah. They.
So to give a little more detail, it was basically using udon noodles to make foods traditionally not made with udon.
That too, yeah. So they had like karaage, which is like deep fried udon.
Yeah.
They had like a kind of udon, sashimi inspired udon. So
yeah, it was like a thin sheet of udon, and it was good too.
Yeah. And they had plenty of other interesting things on the dish on the menu too. But their signature thing is the udon meshi, where, for example, they had one that was kind of like an Italian style, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and another one that was kind of like chicken ramen style. Just very good stuff. Very good stuff. What was it called? What was it called?
I don't remember the names now.
I wrote an article about this. I will put it in the show notes and insert it later. I checked, and the name of the restaurant is Sururi. Sururi. I'll include the information for the article and the restaurant in the show notes. You can go check out the full show notes at japankyo.com/Ichimon Japan. But yeah, I recommend that place. But yeah, you do get really creative stuff. For example, last time when I saw Ryan and we stayed in the Ueno area of Japan, of Tokyo, and we were just walking around and trying different stuff. And one place that we found was an izakaya, a bar kind of izakaya that served alligator, right? They served gator. And
yeah, that was great too.
Yeah, just random stuff that you would never expect. You just walk around and you see a sign saying they have some ridiculous kind of ramen or something. And more often than not, yeah, sometimes it's kind of gimmicky, but it pretty much always is good.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest differences I noticed is just like that. So in the cities, people are willing to try and experiment with more new, different things, mainly because there's lots of competition.
Yeah.
In the countryside, it's like, that's not how you cook udon, so we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, then we just have like 3 different tastes to choose from every day.
Yeah. You just get like kind of a little mom and pop shop that's been doing it forever. And that's how they do it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And what they have might be good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
It's like, it's just a lack of variety.
Yeah. And like where in the place that I stayed in Fukuoka, they had a really nice like yakitori place. So the chicken skewers. And we were talking to the family that I was with, and I was talking to them, and they were telling me like they only recently had to like up their prices just a little bit, but they hadn't changed their prices in like 40 years or something.
So it's like 20 yen.
Yeah, it was like ridiculously cheap. And like only the past couple of years, I think they had raised like the yakitori prices just a little bit. So you still see things like it was like a super old place, but just wonderful. I loved it. Great food. So you do find places like that, but imagine if that was like one of only like 5 or 6 places in the area and you like trying new things. Yeah, I can see how that would get kind of tiring.
I think actually your recent trip here is a great example for why I prefer cities. It's actually kind of what settled my mind that I'm definitely moving after a couple of years. I'm going to finish working here a couple more years, but I'm planning to move to Tokyo or Osaka again. And the reason is when you came, we originally had a plan to go to like a art exhibit.
Yeah.
And we found out that day after we arrived that the exhibit had closed.
Well, that specific day it was closed.
That specific day it was closed.
Coincidence,
so we were,
yeah.
But we were just kind of like out in downtown Tokyo with suddenly no plans. And just wandering around, we found tons of interesting things to do. Like we found a free car show.
Yeah.
There was some like famous band having a reunion that we didn't listen to. But
what was it? I think it was Gact. Gact?
Yeah.
No. Was it Gact? Or it was no. It was the guy from Lark and Steel, Hide. He was having a concert in Odaiba, and we just happened to be walking by like this huge line of people waiting. And we were like, "What's going on?" And it was a concert, So, yeah, tons of stuff going on.
But essentially, you can have literally no plans. Just go out and wander and find tons of interesting things. In the Inaka, that will not happen. If what you want to see gets canceled,
that's it.
Go home.
Yeah.
I mean, you can walk down the street and have a nice walk, but that's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I overall, I don't drive. So like, I love trains. I love trying new restaurants. So of course there's that. And I think there's a nice compromise. For example, like Kobe is within 20-30 minutes by like the express train to Osaka. That's where I was living. It's not a ridiculously big city. It's a fairly on the smaller side kind of city, but it's a wonderful little city that has great restaurants. The rent is usually quite affordable. And if you really want to go to the city, then you can go to Osaka and find even more stuff there. So I think there's plenty of places around.
And the second most famous Chinatown.
Yeah. There's Motomachi, they call it. It's a nice place. They have some nice street food. And there's also the statue of Tetsujin 28 I think, which in English, I think they call him Gigantor in English. But he's like that.
I think that's one of his names.
Yeah, like he's like that big round mecha giant robot from like, I think it was a 1970s show. And there's a life-size statue, and that's in the Shin-Nagata station on the JR line. And I used to work like one station away from that. So I've been to that station, that statue several times and walked around, and it's pretty cool. But yeah, there's tons of stuff, and it's all pretty accessible. So there's tons of like mediums to smaller size cities that are pretty close to the big cities in Japan. So I think, if I were to live in Japan, it would probably be somewhere like that, maybe Kobe again, or maybe Osaka. I'm not particularly crazy about living in like the middle of Tokyo, just kind of too much for me. But if I was kind of nearby, that would maybe be okay.
Honestly, like I want to, before we like finish the topic, I do want to stress, I do like my town. Like I said, the people are great, the culture is great. I just wish we had more. Like if we could somehow physically move the city to be 20 minutes away from downtown Tokyo, then that would just be perfect.
Yeah. And I've had wonderful experiences in rural Japan, and I think visiting, I've had wonderful times. But when it comes to living, I'm more of on the city side.
I will say visiting the rural parts are not as boring as you might assume. Yeah. My parents came to visit this summer, and they were here for 2 weeks. The first week we were looking in Osaka, the second week in my town here, and both of them actually said they preferred like my town here. It's less touristy, but they were able to get more of a feel for what it's actually like to live and work in Japan.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
and just interact with Japanese people more because no one really talks to you in the cities.
Yeah. It's definitely, you get a totally different impression of what Japan is when you're, in the middle of Tokyo versus a place like where you are.
Yeah. I do think if you have the chance, it's very much worth it to experience both.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not necessarily easy to do, but if you can.
Yeah. And then I think one thing that one of the main things I guess I want to close out with is Japan is currently in the midst of like a very sharp population decline. Right?
Yes.
And so smaller cities and towns are in pretty dire situations. There's tons of places around Japan because older people are dying out and the younger people are going to the cities.
Yeah.
And I mean, we talked about this like not recording, but there aren't that many people around your age, right? Like it seems in your area.
Yeah, it seems like people go through high school here, then move away for college.
Yeah.
And then many of them come back in like their 40s when they have kids and want to start a family, like where they grew up. But if you are younger and hoping to meet someone, it is considerably harder in the countryside.
Absolutely,
I'll say.
Yeah. And what you see now a lot is smaller towns, smaller cities, they come up with ways to attract people away from the city. So just this week, I got a link from a friend of mine that he was showing me a video of this one town. I don't remember exactly. I don't remember exactly where it was, but the mayor was trying to attract people by giving them free houses. So there's tons of empty just houses.
Heck, I'll go
Yeah,
there.
but the catch is you have to live there for 7 years. So if you stay the entire 7 years, free house for you. But if you leave before the 7 years, then I guess you have to pay, either all of it or some portion of it. And there's tons of places around Japan, giving tax cuts or some kind of incentive for you to live there with a family. And
That might explain why some of them come back with kids after
exactly
getting some discount like that.
The tricky thing about that, though, is it's kind of like what you just said, that ultimately you're attracting the families that are already they're married, they have kids. And so the people in their 20s and 30s are still not really there, right? They're still off in the city.
Yeah.
Which only motivates the people in their 20s and 30s to leave the city to go to Tokyo, Osaka, and the bigger places. So it's kind of it's a really difficult situation. And honestly, I mean, the reality is that a lot of little towns are just going to disappear. There's no way that they can sustain them.
I will say though, if I was raising kids, I do think the city I'm in now would probably be more fun to grow up as a child than in the city.
Yeah.
Just because we have big open fields and stuff they can go play in and pretend to be samurai or whatever they want to do. We actually have a skate park here, which surprised me because I never even saw one of those in Japan.
Yeah,
and
that's cool.
This town has one.
Oh. And then another thing that you told me they had was a card shop, right? Like a game shop.
Oh yeah. So I'm a pretty active player of Magic the Gathering, and that's fairly big in Japan too. I heard it's the second biggest market for it in the world. But usually in the smaller areas, they don't have it. But we do have a shop here, it's actually a great shop. I really like them a lot. And it's kind of funny because it's such a small shop, we kind of all know each other. So there was a big tournament in Kobe 2 years ago with 3,000 people. And the four of us who went found each other. And even though I was the foreigner, I was still kind of viewed as being on their team kind of.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
But then we all lost on Japan.
So yeah, that's, and you said that was one of only 2 shops in Japan or something like that.
Oh no, there's a lot of them in Tokyo and Osaka,
okay.
I think.
But
I think in Ishikawa there's only.
Oh, okay.
There's only 2 that I know of.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, but that's pretty cool. I mean, sometimes you do find random stuff like that for some reason just it's there even though it's a rural place.
I guess another advantage is that because the land is cheaper. There's things that require big spaces that would be too expensive to build, in downtown areas. Some of my friends are members at a rock climbing gym that's indoor fake wall climbing kind of thing, which I think is kind of common, at least from my growing up in California. There was places like that.
Yeah. I've been to places in Japan.
But downtown Osaka, Tokyo, everything's kind of narrow and small, so you can't really build something like that. But you can do that here.
Yeah. I went to one in Kyoto. But it's just kind of expensive, so I didn't end up continuing. But it's probably cheaper in that area.
I guess we're also better if you're into fishing and boating because we have rivers where the high school students practice canoeing and stuff, and there's fishing all around.
Yeah. I'm not too outdoorsy, although I do like a nice hike every once in a while. So
I should mention, me and you are probably biased that I think we're both not outdoorsy people, which makes us greatly prefer the city. If you are an outdoorsy person, then the countryside's probably a lot better for you because there's actually camping spots and parks, all over the place.
Yeah. I know a professor in Sapporo, and he was telling me during the warmer months, they go camping every weekend. They just go all around Hokkaido and just, all right, let's go camping, him and his wife. And he's probably close to 60. And they've been doing that. That's just something they do for fun. Their kids are off to college. So they can do that. They just go and, do cookouts and go camping. And it sounds like a wonderful time, but I didn't grow up with that. So I'm not used to that.
Yeah. Me, I'm why would I do that? There's no electricity. How do I play my video games?
Yeah.
I do have another friend, a foreign friend actually, who likes living here because he's a big fan of snowboarding.
Oh, yeah.
We don't really have mountains in this city, but we're near mountainous snowboarding areas, which, I mean, of course, Tokyo and Osaka aren't exactly renowned for their snowboarding slopes.
Yeah. People end up going to Nagano or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, each side, of course, I mean, it's kind of a predictable conclusion, but, each side has its own benefits, and it's ultimately up to you where you want to go. But I think if you really want to get the full Japan experience, you should visit both sides, check it all out.
Yeah, I would heavily recommend that because I am enjoying the country life here much more than I thought I would before I came here.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though I say I want to move back to the city, like I said, it's not because I hate it here. I do like it here. It's just I think there's things I like more in the other areas.
Yeah, yeah. And, you end up appreciating, the side that you do like more, and you end up learning that, hey, maybe the thing you thought was one way is not necessarily that way. Yeah. So, yeah.
There's more than one face to any country, so it's nice to see what it's like to live in city life Japan and country life Japan. It's especially fun talking with Japanese people because both of us are not Japanese, but occasionally I get to be the expert in the situation if I'm talking with someone who's never lived in the countryside. They're like, oh, you have that? They're like, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course we have that. I don't know what that is, but
yeah, so there you go. I think hopefully we offered some interesting insights. If you have any questions that you want to ask us about Japan, we'll do our best to answer them. And you can email Ichimon at japankyo.com. That is, of course, Ichimon, Ichimon, at japankyo.com, japankyo.com. So that's it. Anything else, Ryan?
Yeah, please visit Japan.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently you can get a free house if you stay here 7 years.
Yeah, absolutely. You do your homework, and if you're willing to live like in the middle of nowhere, you could probably get a pretty darn good deal on land and everything. There's tons of abandoned houses, so...
I remember I had a friend who actually did jet somewhere really rural, and he got like a 2-story house for free.
Yeah.
Just because they're just overflooded with houses, I guess.
Yeah. No, you hear tons of stories with people. Because, just really briefly, but jet people that come to teach English as part of jet, usually they get sent to like middle of nowhere places, right? Or fairly rural places, like you, on the rural side. But there's plenty of even more rural examples. And usually in those situations, you end up in some nice house or big house at least. And often you don't even have to pay, or you pay very minimal amounts. So yeah. And you end up, that's a good thing about, you can save money. That definitely does help.
Yeah. And trying new things is good.
Exactly. All right. So that does it. Thanks for joining me, Ryan, once again. And
my pleasure.
we'll see you next time.
See ya.